This is a tutorial video for the Year 9 Space Chase project for teachers, and it'll take you through the entire build of the Space Chase project, as well as some common issues that you might find along the way. So in order to get this Space Chase program, what you're going to need to do is jump onto Study Zone and download this Space Chase project here, and most of the pupils will need to download this as well, as this is the template file that we're going to be using as part of this project, which will help to speed them up because there's a few sounds and a few rooms already created in here. So the first thing you're going to need to do with pupils is, once they've downloaded and saved this project, is to open it. And then the first part of this project is going to be fairly straightforward. So on Moodle, you'll notice there's an introduction and then there's a planning. The planning is all in the pupil booklet, and the introduction is also in the pupil booklet. It's when you come down to the game creation, and when we start then looking at these first few parts, is when you actually start building this project. So the first thing you're going to need to do is create a few sprites. So you can see you have a sprites folder. So to do this, you need to right click on the sprites folder, go to create, and then down to sprites. And what we typically do is we get the pupils to name these, so S player. Now you'll notice this follows a naming convention. I try to get the pupils to do this all the time. So you have a lowercase s, and then player will be a little bit larger. And obviously then when we make a collectible, it'll be S collect. Likewise, then you'll have a number of other different sprites as well. So once you've created the S player, the next thing you need to do is actually create the player from the design. Now to do this, if you click on edit image, you'll notice the sprite editor will load. Most of the time pupils don't have an issue with this sprite editor. A few things that people do forget though is to create layers. Okay, so if we just go through this very quickly, the toolbox here, the paintbrush is standard. So if you hold down the mouse button and draw, you can see it draws a bit of a line. You've got different brush sizes at the top here, so you can do different sizes. You've got different colors as well. If you make a mistake, you have an eraser tool, and that works in the same way as any normal eraser. When you click and hold down, it'll erase. And likewise then, you do have a few other objects here as well, such as the shape tool, which does a solid color, although if you click the top half, it'll just do the outer line, and the line size depends on obviously the brush there as well. Okay, so if you, for example, use the rounded brush, you can see it puts a little bit more of a corner on there as well. Now you'll notice as I'm going through this very quickly, there's a number of different tools which look to be fairly similar. Anything with two buttons on it will basically mean a fill and an outline as well. If you wish to do a full color, if you use the fill tool here, which will allow you then just to put a solid color on, and if you click the layer tool here, then you can see the layers are added. And let's say for argument's sake I want to draw two eyes, so I'm going to go with this one here, and I'm going to choose a white, and then let's say for argument's sake I add another object in here and we want to do a mouth. We can do that. Now the advantage of putting it on different layers is that you can move these things. So let's say for argument's sake I need to move the eyes over a little bit. If I click on that layer and then click the move tool, I can then just move these around a little bit. Okay, again, if I click on the other layer there and move the mouth, I can move it up or down and move it around. If you don't use layers, this is impossible. You can't move things easily. Okay, so we're gonna just add one more thing into this layer here, and I'm just going to add a set of eyes there, and that there is my player completed and done. Now let's say for argument's sake you wanted to change this. You can at a later stage, because the player and the code are separate. So the object is what holds all of the code. So what we're going to do next is make the object for the player. So to save this, all you've got to do is close that sprite, and you can see that saved here, and then let's close it here, and then that there saved it into the corner. Now when we make the objects, what we're going to do is you're going to right click on the object, go to create, and then go to object, and then that will allow you then to create the O player. and then you can bind these two together. Now, what I typically get the pupils to do, because it is a lot easier, is to create all of the sprites first. So if you look at the sprites folder, I've got S player. What I normally ask them to do then is make S enemy. Then I'll ask them then right click, create, go down to sprite, S collect. We'll normally have an S wall. And what we'll also then do is we'll do another one then for S end. And the thing to watch out here is that when the pupils are creating this, they're using and clicking on sprites, because sometimes they'll click on something else. You'll know straight away if anyone's gone wrong, because their sprite editor will look completely different. Okay, so once they've done that, what I normally ask people to do, and we normally give them then the rest of the lesson to do this, is to draw all of their sprites that they need. So for example, they can draw their enemies, they can draw the collectibles, they can draw their wall, and they can draw their end. The only thing to note, when they're doing the wall, what I normally ask people to do is on the wall, use the paint bucket and just choose a color and make sure they are using this so it covers the entire range of the sprite. That's the only time I ever ask people to make sure that the entire sprite is covered. Everything else they can draw, but they need to make sure the entire sprite is covered with the wall. So what I would advise now is, if you're following this, you need to create a few of these sprites, use the drawing tools to create these different options for your game. So once you've created all of your sprites and you have them ready to use, you can then start creating the objects. Now, if you've missed or can't remember, with the player object, you right click, create, and go to object, and then that then will allow you to create a new object. And like we called the other one S player, we're going to call the objects, we're going to prefix them with this O, so make sure they're O player. And that then allows us to basically make the difference between an object and the sprite as well. So whenever you make the object, you then bind the sprite. So I'm just going to delete this so I can show you how to do it again. So if we go to objects, right click, create, and go down to object, and then we're going to call this O player. Notice we have the O in the front again, and then where you have this no sprite, what we're going to do is click on there, click on sprite, and then all of your sprites will be visible, just to make sure you choose the correct one. So we've now created our object and we've bound it together. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to make our object move, so we're going to code it. So what we're going to do is click on add event, and then you're going to go down to this key down, and we're going to use the arrow keys here. So we're going to start with the right, and this option will come up then with scripting preference. So I typically will click on GML visual, and I will ask the pupils to do that as well. And then make sure you tick this, don't ask again for this project, otherwise every object is going to ask you what you want to do. So make sure that's ticked and click on there, and then click OK. You'll only ever have to do this once. So for this, we need to now start thinking about how we move. So with GameMaker, in a room, we have an X and a Y axis, and X is for the horizontal and Y is for vertical. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw this in here, and I'm going to say X, and I'm going to then click on this built-in variable, and then I'm going to put a number 4. And what we do is we make sure it is relative. Now, if when the pupils play this, the object doesn't move, the first thing to check is make sure this has been ticked here in each of the other boxes. So I'm going to add in the right, left, up, down shortly. The other thing to check is to make sure they've used a lowercase x here. Most of the time pupils will use a lowercase, but sometimes pupils do use the uppercase, and then that will cause it not to work. So once you've done the down, the key down right, we need to do left. So add event, key down, and then left. We're then going to add in the same thing here, another var. And this time it's going to be x again, lowercase. But this time, because we're going the other way, we're going to say -4. Now you'll notice I've chosen 4. 4 is a good number. It's a relatively quick speed, but it's not too quick and it's not too slow. So you've just programmed now the left and the right. Let's just do the up and down. So if we click on add event again, key down and then up. And then let's change this now. We're going to do a Y. And to go up, you need to do minus whatever the number you choose is. So I got my -4. And we're going to now do another one for key down. So add event, key down and down. And again, we're going to just add this in, put a Y there. Ooh, not Y previous, just Y. Click on there. And then we're going to do a number 4 and make sure that's relative as well. So that is the entire movement now, up, down, left, right. And it will also allow you then to go diagonal as well. So the next thing that you're going to need to do with the pupils is to add this player object into the room. Now within this here, you'll notice room 1 and win. We'll come back to that win later. So if you double click on room 1, you'll have then a blank room with a number of lines. So there's a grid network on there. Sometimes pupils do turn this off by clicking this. I typically ask the pupils to make sure they leave this on, so don't show it to them unless they need it. But essentially with the grid, it allows you then to position things a little bit better than if you didn't have a grid. So the first thing we need to do is add in on the left hand side here a new layer, and this is very, very important. It's good to instill good skills. So we are going to add in this here, create new instance layer, and we're going to right click on it, rename, and we're going to call this player. Okay, so I've added a new layer in and it's called player, and then we're just going to drag this player in and leave it go. And then what it'll allow you to do then is play the actual project. Now when you play the project, what you'll find is the game will load, and then you can actually try the up, down, left, right. Now if at any point a pupil has an issue and something doesn't work, the first thing to always check is to make sure they've used the key down. Sometimes pupils use key press. The easy way to look for it is to make sure these little icons are used. So if they've used these 4 same icons, you should be okay. Next, when you double click onto it, again, make sure the variables are lowercase and make sure everything has a tick here. That then should be the majority of the fault finding for this section. Now the next thing that you are going to need to try to do with them is to then start thinking about the other objects that they are going to add in. Now with everything, as we start building the objects up, there's going to be more that we're going to add in, and the more complex things are going to be, the better essentially overall the game experience. So the next thing I typically get people to do is create the walls. So we've already got now our S wall. So if I right click on the object, go to create, and then go down to object here, and then we're going to call this a wall. And then what we need to do is bind the wall sprite to the object, and the only thing you need to do with this is click on this here, which is solid. Now that's really important to do, because what that allows you to do then is create a solid option here. There are other ways of doing walls, but this is probably one of the quickest, and especially for year 9, it'll be one of the best for them. Okay, so the next thing you need to do is go back to this room 1, and you can zoom out a little bit, and what we're going to then do is add in a new instance layer. We're going to right click on it, rename, and we're going to call this walls. Now when you're building the wall, the first thing we do is we just drag one option in, and you can see you can move it around and you can make it bigger or smaller. This is the only time I'd advise you to stretch out any object. And it's when we're also using the walls. Now one thing to note is sometimes what can happen is pupils will move it so that it almost becomes invisible, and then you can't actually click on this. You've got to be very careful when you do this, and this is part of the fault finding. So sometimes pupils will make something, code it, and then it'll almost just appear to stop randomly. And what you do is if you click on the walls, you can see all of the walls that have been used are here. Now you can see I've only got 3 on here as an example, but if I click on this, it highlights and shows me which wall this is. So it's actually selected that one there. And if I click on that one, that's selected there. And if I click on this last one, you can see there's an object here, and that then allows me to just delete it and add another object in instead. That is only if you only ever need to show pupils that if they are having difficulty. If you notice with this tutorial as we go through, I am literally just going to do a very basic maze here. Okay, so one of the things that you are going to find as you add these in, what I normally like to try to tell people to do is keep at least 3 blocks around. You can work it so that you can go with 2, but I normally advise 3 because that then guarantees it'll work a little bit better. You're giving your player a little bit more space to move around. You can copy and paste these blocks as well. So if you make a few horizontal ones and copy them very quickly, you can see that'll save you then a little bit of time as you start designing your maze. And likewise, if we create a vertical option here and we add that in like so, you can copy and paste them then again, so you can see that is a very quick way of doing it. You can also edit them, and because you're on the walls layer, if you click on any of these then it selects them, you can then change them and do anything you need to them as well at the same time. Now what I normally ask people to do at this point is to start building their walls based on their plan. There will be a slight change to some of their plans as they start going, because they might have been a bit adventurous. They might have put too many walls in, for example. They might have done a little bit too much. But get them to build their walls and get them then to test it. Now, when they test this, the player is actually going to go through the walls. So what we need to do is add in a collision. So to do this, you need to double click on the O player, click on add event, go down to collision, object O wall. And then what we're going to do is you're going to use what's called a jump tool. So if we search for jump, and it's this one here, jump to point, I normally put 0, 0 in here and make them relative. And then what I'll ask the people to do then is play that and then see how the game actually works and how it loads. So as you can see, I can go through this now and we can go around and we basically stop when we hit an option. What I always tell people to do as well is check to make sure the player can go through these really tight spots. If for some reason it can't, then what they need to do is either change their maze a little bit by changing the position of some of these walls, or make the walls a little bit smaller and thinner. Now, once you've done that, get the pupils to test everything that they've done so far. Make sure it loads, make sure every wall works, and make sure the player does crash into them and does not go through. So the next part of this then is to create the enemy object. So what we're going to do now is on the objects, right click, go to create, and then object, and then we're going to call this O enemy. And once you've made O enemy, what we're then going to do is bind the sprite and the object together. So you can see there's no difference here to when we created the player and the wall. You're not going to make it a solid this time though. Now what I like to then do is get the pupils to go back to the room. We're going to add in a new instance layer, rename this and call it enemy, and then get the pupils to add in a few enemies in here. Now with the enemies, what they're going to do is they're going to bounce between 2 points. Now you need to be very mindful when you're doing this, because if you say, for example, put an enemy in here, there is no way the player is ever going to get through this area here, because the enemy is just going to be bouncing back and forth. There's no room. Likewise, if you have something where there's an enemy here, then there is no way the player is going to be able to come up through here and get out in time, right? It's just not going to work. So you might now at this point need to redesign some of the walls, and that's absolutely fine. It's part of the testing. So you can ask the pupils then just to double check everything works, because it might be the case that they do need to consider then moving things around. Just make sure they are putting things on the correct layer as well. Now, once you've added these enemies in, they're not actually going to do anything, so we haven't coded them yet. So this is the next part. Now, when we play the game, what you find is all of the enemies are static objects. So they're just sitting there, they're not doing anything. We're going to get them to move across this plane here. And when they hit the walls, they're going to bounce and go the other way. So to do this is 3 steps. First thing you're going to do is open the O enemy. And then we're going to go add event, create, and we're going to create a variable. So we're going to drag this in, and we're then going to say enemy speed, and we're going to give it a value of, we're going to go with 3. Now notice what I've done here. Enemy is lowercase, speed starts with a capital letter. Okay, it's very important. It's good programming skill as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to then add event, we're going to add a step, and then step, and this time we are then going to add in the X, and this is going to be X enemy speed. Now as you start typing enemy speed, you should just be able to click on it and then make sure that's relative. When you play the game, if you find that the enemy doesn't move, it's normally because they haven't ticked this relative option here. Now, if I play this game here, now what you're going to find is all of the enemies will start moving and they'll just go off the screen. They'll go towards the right and they'll just go off. So what we need to do now is get the enemies to bounce back the other way. So to do this, click on add event, collision, object, or wall. And then what we're going to do is you're going to use a piece of code. So we're going to say enemy speed again. And then on the bottom here, we've got value. We're going to say enemy speed. And then we're going to multiply by -1. So what that does is it turns the positive number of enemy speed into a negative number. And then it'll change the negative number back into a positive. So as an example, if we play the game here now very quickly. So if we take any one of these now at the moment, this enemy is a positive, and then it's a negative, and then it's going to be a positive number again. Okay, so what this is doing is it's switching it between a positive and a negative, and that gets it to bounce as well. You might get a pupil who asks you, how can I get it to go vertically? Well, what they need to do is create another object and call it OEnemy2 as an example. And the only code they'll need to change is in the step event, and instead of using X, they'll use Y. Sometimes pupils want some which are vertical and some which are horizontal. That's the best way of doing it. Okay, so once you've done the enemy objects and you can see they are working, they're moving, the next thing we're going to do is basically make a collision. So if the player hits the enemy for whatever reason, we then need to restart the game because we are going to essentially lose all points within this. Now, once you've done that, what we're then going to do is add in a little bit of code. So I'm going to go into my O player and we're going to add in the add event. We're then going to go collision, objects, enemy. So when the player hits the enemy, what we're going to do is we're going to look for the restart. And you'll notice you've got restart room or restart game. I typically will go for restart game here because we haven't got a lot in here and it's the quickest one to use with this. So once you've done that, what will happen is now when the player hits the enemy, so if I just show you this now very quickly. So when the player hits the enemy, we just restart. And if you notice, everything then resets, which is good. It's exactly what you want. Okay, So once you've added the player and you have the collision, what we're then going to do is you're going to add some objects in. We're going to add a collectible. So let's right click, create, and let's go down to object. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to put O collect, and we're going to bind the sprite together, which is excellent. And then what we're going to do is add in a few of these objects into the game. So if we go back to our room, let's add in a new layer, right click, rename, and we're going to call this one collect. And then all you need to do is add a few into this option here. Now, when you go to add them in, you just drag them in, and you can see that is there. Now, I typically get people to add in at least 5. If you want to add more in, you can. It doesn't matter as long as you add enough in for you to enable you to end the actual game itself. Okay, so we've added a few in here. Next thing we need to do now is code them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on the O collect, and what we need to do is add a collision with the object player. Now that sounds a bit backwards, but it does make sense. So when the object collide to the player, what we're going to do is you're going to add a var in, and we're going to use the variable score, all lowercase, 1 relative, so that will add 1 to our score. And what we also want to do is add in one of these destroys. So what that's going to do is it'll take it out of the game. Now at the moment we haven't got anywhere to display our score, but if I just show you what's going to happen now, when we hit these, they are disappearing. Okay, so that's exactly what it is you want them to do. Now there is another thing that you can do. If you search for effect and add in an effect here, you can see there's a number of different options here you can play and try with. What this allows you to do is have different effects when something happens. So let's just drag that in. What typically happens is people add these in and go, oh, it doesn't work. There is a reason. It is actually working. If you take a look in the top left-hand corner, the actual effect is happening up here. So what we need to do is make sure that it is relative to the object. And with this one, I'm just going to change it to firework. And let's just click on play. And now when we press it, you can see it's actually quite nice. Now, if you wanted to change the positioning of this, if you add, say, 20, and let's go 20 to this, what that's going to do is change the position of the animation. So you can see now it's lower down a little bit, but obviously you can change this and you can try out different values there. So far that is essentially everything that is working. The other thing that we're going to do then is we are going to add in the way to end this project as well. So what we're going to do is go back to our object, right click, create, and go to object, and I'm going to call this OEnd, and I'm just going to then look for the flag, which is SEnd, and we're going to need to place this into the room somewhere. So I'm going to just add a new instance layer, and I'm going to call this one end, and I'm just going to drag it in down the bottom. In fact, I'm going to put it here. Now, the problem we've got at the moment is if my player were to just go over here, we could potentially just win the game. But we need to put a conditional, and this is going to be different for every pupil. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to open OEnd. We're going to add a collision with the object player. So when the flag and the player collide, what we're going to do is you're going to use an if statement. So what we're going to say is if the score is greater than or equal to, and I'm going to choose 5. Now the reason I've chosen 5 is because I've obviously got 6 items in my game. So obviously if I get 5 or more, I'll be able to go on to the next level or the win level. Now the next thing you need to do is add in a go-to room. So if I scroll down here, you'll notice towards the bottom we have rooms, and if we click hold down with the mouse, drag, and put it to the right-hand side, you'll notice it says then go to room, and then we have an option then on which room to go to. So click on there. There's only one other room in here, which is called Win, which is pre-made. You don't need to do anything with it. It's all there ready for you. Now, typically where pupils go wrong with this is they either mess up this here, the is greater than, they just leave it to equal to, or what sometimes happens is people just chuck that in like so, and then they say, oh yeah, but I can win all the time. You need to make sure that it goes to the left, sorry, to the right-hand side of this if block. Now, once you've done that, what you need to do is press play and test the game out with the pupils. Now, the easiest way to test it is if you just crash into it. If it takes you to the win room, you know something's gone wrong. The other way then is if we collect a few different objects. And let's try and go here. That hasn't worked, so let's go and grab another one. Let's try and go here. Lovely, that worked. Excellent. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to try one more thing with this. As you can probably see, we have win, which will come up, no problem at all. We've also got our greater than or equal to, which will also work. We also need to do one more thing with this. Now, if I go back to my room here, it would be lovely if we had a score counter on the top. So in order to get the score counter up, if you double click on the player, and then what we're going to do is you're going to add an event. It's going to be a draw and a draw GUI. And what we're going to do on this is you are going to look for the text option, which is halfway down, and you're going to put this in, draw value. And I'm going to use the word your score is, and then I'm going to put score. Now this is really, really important, right? You can see your score is in speech marks. The word score is all lowercase because that there is a variable, okay? Now, if we play this at this moment in time, what you're going to find is that in the top corner, you will now have a score counter. So as you can see here, as I collect things, 1, 2, it's going up, which is excellent. If you want to make this stand out a little bit more, there is a font that you can use. So if you use this set font, and then you can change this set font to be this one here, font score, because I've already made it. And now if you make that, it makes the font a little bit larger on the top there. But it still works exactly the same, which is really good. Now, one thing to just note, if we get hit by the enemy, you'll notice the score counter doesn't reset. Okay, there's a little bit of code we've got to add in to make sure the score counter resets. And all we're going to do is you're going to go back to your player and you're going to go to add event, create. And then what you do is you make sure that this is score and is set to 0. And now each time the game resets, the score will also reset. So you can see there now I've got 1, 2 points. Let's get hit by the enemy. I lose it. The game restarts. And then I'm away to go here again. You'll notice when you do this create, it is not a relative, right? If you tick relative here, when the game loads, it'll produce an error. Okay, so if you do see an error after this, just make sure the pupils have not ticked relative. It's one of the few times you do not need to tick relative. So this is the majority of the game done. The last thing is if you wish to use sound files with them. Now, built in with this, I have placed a few different sound files already in here. They don't have to use them all. If they double click on one of the sound files on the object, they can actually hear them by pressing the play button. If they've got headphones on the machine, they'll also then be able to hear them there as well. So to get these to work, what you need to do is open up the collisions. So let's say, for argument's sake, I open up O collect. What I'm going to do is look for, let's get rid of the search here. We're going to look for the purple options, which are here, play audio. And then we are going to choose the audio file here. So collect. And each time now we collect an option, I don't know why that has come in there, didn't need it. Every time we collect something, ooh, we have an error. Okay, the reason we had an error is accidentally I'd added some other code in here. I've just taken it out. Let's just replay that again. There we are, that works. And likewise, if we add in something else for the end, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in another sound file. And this is just going to go above here. And then this is the win. So again, when you hit that file, it's going to play that there. Okay. Now, the majority of the time, the pupils' work will work no problem at all. What can happen is pupils will try to type certain things in here. So where you've got go to room, if they had lowercase in, which sometimes pupils do try to type, GameMaker will just throw that out as an error. Just make sure that they are using the asset chooser or asset picker to select the correct asset. Likewise, when they are going in with certain things, just make sure that they are using the correct variable names, because that again can cause a few errors and issues when they are playing with it. One other thing now, once they are done with the entire project and they've tested it and they can see that it works, what they're going to need to do is export the file. To do this, you're going to use the file, export, and they need to make sure they're exporting this. It's YYZ. Once they've done that, call it something like Space Chase Final Game, so they know the file is slightly different, and that then will allow them to export it and upload it to you for marking.